world is watching in horror what's happening in Ukraine. The question for us today is, are we doing enough? Hello, everybody. Hello, Rabbi Litwak. How are you today?
Hello, Rabbi David. How am I? I am sad. I
Yeah.
am distraught. This is not a topic that I want to be dealing with.
Yeah,
Yet
absolutely.
we got to
Here we
deal
are.
with
And
it.
you've been dealing with it for weeks. I mean, I know you spoke about it on Shabbos a
Yeah,
couple of times
two week,
already. And
2 weeks in a row, and
yeah,
I'm probably going to speak about it again tomorrow.
I'm
Um,
not sure how we talk about anything. I felt guilty. You know, I love watching YouTube videos, and I've found myself feeling guilty enjoying YouTube videos that aren't about this. I find myself feeling guilty not thinking about what's happening and our response to it. And I just, before we jumped on, I just went over to the BBC to take a look at what's been going on, and there's just no, I don't see any light. But the bigger question for me today, and for us today, that I really wanted to ask you about, because I'm really struggling with it, is, are we doing enough? And just to set the stage, let me put on the table kind of the elephant, I think, that's in the room around our response. And then I know we're going to talk a little bit about Israel's role and our role, but I think the elephant is the no-fly zone. And I have heard numerous people say why we can't do a no-fly zone. And yet, I find myself still saying, how can we not do a no-fly zone? So that's the piece that's the bug that's in my head. But let's maybe take a step back. And
yeah.
I mean, how can we even begin to approach this question of,
How do we
are we
frame this?
standing, yeah, are we standing idly by? What do you think?
Well, I think that we have to start with the idea, and I don't think there's any great new Torah here, that um, states have to balance the tension between their moral values and their strategic interests. When we as the
That makes
United,
me, I mean, just saying that makes me feel a little ill. I'm not going to lie. It does.
yes, because you and I are moral human
How do we
beings.
ever put our moral values aside? I mean, of course,
Because
I'm being argumentative intentionally because I know that I even do that from time to time, but it still makes me feel, ooh,
yes,
yeah,
that is
yeah,
for sure. I'll give you another context in which to think about it, and really what I've been thinking about, uh, in preparation for this week, because this week is Shabbat Zachor.
oh yeah,
Uh, that this is the Shabbat before Purim, and we think about those who came to destroy us. And again, I want to be clear, as I have over the last few weeks, that this is not a Jewish. This is not Putin's anti-Semitism. There may be some of that, but he's not
yeah.
going
Right.
directly
I
after
think
the
there's some of that.
Jews. Um, but I think that it can give us a context in which to understand this. That we have to remember what has happened in history, and that when we think about um, are we standing idly by? Of course, the the frame that we are looking at is through the frame of the Holocaust, the lens of the Holocaust, and um,
And by the
that
way, if I could just say, Rabbi, that Putin gave us that lens when he talks
oh,
about the
for sure.
denazification
Oh,
of Ukraine.
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, and it leads us right into it. which is why I think I'm going to err on the side. And I don't think it's an error. I think that we have to put our morals on the line, because if we don't, then our strategic interests are simply uh, we will lose who we are as a people. Um, so I've been thinking about the idea of Shabbat Zachor, of remembering what has happened in the past, and that is not necessarily balanced, but intertwined with the post-Holocaust statement of never again. Right? That we as a Jewish community have to make sure that we're never ever isolated, we're never helpless, that we are always able and ready to fight back, or even in a slightly different way, to take the life and the legacy of Elie Wiesel, and think about never again being an admonition, or a moral and ethical responsibility to be involved, to not be silent, you know, that we shouldn't fail to do something, even if it is limited in scope. And so, without jumping too far ahead, my feeling of, are we standing idly by? You know, we've got to do something. You can't do nothing.
You can't do nothing, and we're not doing nothing. And the
Right.
world is not doing nothing. The question that I'm struggling with is, are we doing, again, enough? The here's what it seems to me, that our approach is, we can't fight Russia directly. And so let's use tactics that force the Russian people to revolt against their leader. Because our economic sanctions, yeah, they're going to hurt Putin, but they're not going to hurt Putin as much as they're going to hurt the regular person on the street who can't find milk, who can't get gas, who can't do, well, they probably have plenty of gas. But, and so I think part of our hope is that we're going to do enough that they are going to say enough, and they're going to rise up and do what we're not willing to do. And so so yes, we're doing. Of course, we're doing.
But
But
that's going to take months,
months or
and
years
there's going to be a lot of pain
right.
in that.
And it's not helping. Look, Ukraine has told us what they need. They've told us what they need.
Right.
And we've said no. The world has said no.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not for. I'm not suggesting we don't have good reasons for saying no. So I don't mean to say it in a disparaging way. I'm just saying that to me, it seems very clear. We've been told what they need, and and the world has said no. And again, let's give credit where credit is due. I mean, the sanctions that we've put on are insane, incredibly intense. Israel has sent over medical teams. I think we finally came up with a deal with Poland or something where they're going to send the MiGs over. So we are doing, and it's not what they asked for, or it's not all that they asked for. And how do we watch maternity hospitals be bombed and say, well, we're not willing to go that far because that might bring us into a war? Aren't we already there?
That's what I think. I think that in some way, yes, we are doing things, but the things that we are doing are not where we are being silent. Okay, is in the areas that are going to be really painful. Okay?
Yeah.
Um, and uh, you know, uh, yes, thank you, Mr. Wyman. Uh, we are, I think it is crucial for us to do something as individuals. I think our best bet, we may not be able to change the military calculus of the United States, um, uh, but we can. We can do humanitarian aid. I think that I want to say that I think that this is different than World War II in that, at least today, there's plenty of information that is being put out there. Right? There was plenty of information on World War II that was ignored. Right? And this is the question of, I think your question of the no-fly zone is the question of should we bomb the railways? Right? There's plenty of evidence that if we had bombed the railways that were bringing trains into Auschwitz, that we could have saved hundreds of thousands of lives.
And forgive my ignorance, why didn't we?
Because the United States chose to ignore that, because the United States chose not to, because there was anti-Semitism, because they felt that that was not a good use of their military. And they were miles away from those train tracks, and a couple of well-placed bombs would have taken care of it. So, is the no-fly zone the same as the train track? Today's no-fly zone is the same as World War II's train tracks, and I do believe that we are in a that we are in a war. We may not declare it, okay, but we should, as a country, and along with the democracies of the world, should stand up. Because if we don't stand up, then it is tacit approval of what's going on.
So let's talk about war for a moment from a Jewish context, because there are different kinds of war in Judaism. As much as we'd like to think, us Jews, that we're all oseh shalom bimromav, that we're all the peaceniks, we have our share of violence and war in the Torah. And in fact, there are three specific kinds. There's a milchemet reshut, which is a permitted war, a milchemet chova, is that the obligated war?
Yeah.
And then a milchemet mitzvah. Is that the third
Right.
one?
Yeah, I think that's correct.
So what's the difference between those three?
Oh, I should be prepared for this. One is a defensive war. I don't think we're in that. One is a mitzvah, meaning that God has told us that we need to, capture the land, and therefore we're obligated by God. Right?
That's also that's Amalek, right? That's this weekend.
Right.
The
Yeah.
war against Amalek is a I
Is
think
a
is a milchemet
Milchemet
mitzvah.
mitzvah.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's the obligatory one, and that if I remember correctly, if I'm understanding it correctly, is one in which we are obligated morally because of what is happening. And I think that in this case, I don't want to commit our boys or our men and women in military to this, but I think truthfully, I think that the United States has abdicated their role. Okay? And I think that that's part of the reason, if we slide over into the Israel piece, why Israel is in the situation that it is in. I think with America's essentially withdrawal over the past decade, right? And I'm giving a decade because I want it to be clear this isn't a Republican or Democrat issue. I think blame can go all around there, but we have withdrawn from the Middle East, and as a result, Russia is now the chief power broker in the region. And so therefore, Israel is worried that it can't provoke the Russians into action against it. Israel wants to ensure that it can do military maneuvers into Syria. Who is in tacit control of Syria, or the biggest supporter of Syria, is Russia, and Russia allows for that. Okay, and if all of a sudden Israel starts to poke the bear, literally and figuratively, then they're going to find themselves strategically in not so great position. On the other hand,
by the way, I just want to jump in because I come across, because it's my gut reaction, that how dare we not get involved. I just want to acknowledge that, and it came to me because of what you just said about Israel. From Israel's perspective and from the United States' perspective, it's not that we're avoiding this because of gas or money. There's a genuine threat, certainly to Israel, because of Syria. If we can't fly over Syria, we're in a lot of trouble. And from America's perspective, I imagine that there's a real worry about a World War III, that if we end up having to shoot down a Russian jet, that we are provoking World War III. So I don't mean to make this sound like, oh, it should be such an easy decision. I'm grateful every day that I'm not the one who has to make this decision. It just feels...
I agree with that, but I think that the world, I am no scholar of world military history, but I think that in this moment, if America took a stronger stand, right, along with NATO, right, which has far more to lose in this. I acknowledge that. They have, we cut off our gas, our natural gas from Russia, and what was that, 15% or 8%? I forget.
Right. I think it may have even been smaller. Yeah.
Yeah, some small amount that NATO has. That would be a bigger hit to NATO. On the other hand, I think that if all of us were to come together and say, you've got a week to step out before we intervene, I think that the calculus would change dramatically. Right?
Just the threat of us.
Yeah. That's my feeling.
Because in many ways, it's interesting. In many ways, I think that Putin feels like he's got us over the coals. He knows that we don't have the chutzpah. Right. And he knows that because Russia's a member of NATO, he knows that even if we feel obligated, that we won't. And do you one of the things I've been thinking about is the difference between a milchemet chova, the obligatory war, which you described as sort of a war that is not defensive, but it's for moral, it's to promote the peace in the world, to promote morals.
Right.
I've been thinking about the difference between that and a milchemet mitzvah. And I can't figure out if I feel like the position that we're in now, that we are committing a sin by not getting more engaged. Are we, and I'm using the word sin as the opposite of mitzvah, right? Are we
Yeah.
not fulfilling the mitzvah that is before us.
Yeah, I think you could make an argument for that. I think that there is a sin of um, allowing for people to be killed and destruction to happen, and are not doing. Um, Oh. Look, I'll go in a slightly different direction. The Baal Shem Tov, of course, somebody who came from Ukraine, said that one has to have total sacrifice and dedication for love of one's fellow, even towards a Jew who one doesn't know. Right now, whether he would see that and extrapolate to other human beings, or whether he's only referring to one Jew towards another Jew, um, I'm gonna extrapolate, and I think that we have the family of nations, right, has a responsibility, and that the mitzvah of Ahavat Yisrael, okay, loving one's fellow Jews, could be extrapolated to loving one's fellow, right? And that requires something of us. Right? It requires a dedication and a devotion to action.
Yeah. Do you think there is a bridge that at some point will be too far? You
Well,
know,
yeah, that's an
reports of
interesting
chemical
question.
weapons, and is there a time at which Israel or America will say, "Yeah, enough is enough"?
Look, let's go back to the Second World War, right? And um, uh, at what point should we have said this is too much? And I think you have a very important question, and I'm not sure we know what becomes the tipping point when in the future we're going to look back and say we should have done X at that point.
Right.
Uh, I think it's an evolving look. Right now, it's an evolving situation. I don't think we can know that. Hindsight is always 2020,
Sure.
um, but uh,
But
I think
you have to believe that, in the situation room or wherever they're discussing these things, that, that they're talking about if Russia launches a chemical attack, that that's going to be the bridge too far. I mean, you have to imagine that they're thinking about these things.
sure, I'm sure that is, but I'm not sure there have been other chemical attacks uh, in 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 very recent
Right.
American,
That's a
uh,
whole that's another element of this, which is, do we care about this so much because these folks aren't brown?
well, oh,
That right? That's a whole other,
yeah,
and we've actually seen evidence of discrimination even in the response to this Ukrainians of darker skin or Ukrainians of lighter skin.
yeah.
Can I actually go back though? I want to go back. You mentioned the Baal Shem Tov is from Ukraine, and one of the things that I've been feeling is an odd, strange connection to this conflict. When I was in Massachusetts, our sister city was Dnepropetrovsk, which is now known as Dnepro, and so I knew people from there. I don't anymore. It's been many years, but I don't think that's where the source of my connection comes. There's something about, we have so much Jewish history bound up in this part of the world that it feels personal in many ways.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I've said it a few times. My own family has some of its origins in this area, and I think many, whatever percentage it is. It's not 10%. Okay, it's not 20%. It's not even 50%. I think it'd probably be more of American Jews in some way have a connection to this area, and feel a visceral connection, because Anatevka of Fiddler
Right.
on the Roof
Right.
is my
Right.
story, even if it wasn't my story.
Yep.
Right. And those are the communities. Right?
Absolutely. So we're not in the government. We don't get to make foreign policy decisions, but we do still, I think, feel this need to be involved in the fight against tyranny. So I'm curious, have you suggested to our community different ways that they can be responsive to this moment, either
I think,
financially or
yeah,
in
I'm going to say that there are two. Uh, One is that we should be connecting with our legislators, that we should let our president know that there is a moral obligation beyond what, from my standpoint, there is a moral obligation beyond what I think is happening now. And that just means calling the White House and calling our Congress people and calling our senators to make that statement. The more direct is that we should be, if we feel committed, we should be donating money. Right? We should be providing for, at minimum, humanitarian relief for people who are leaving their homes with nothing more than the clothes on their back and maybe a suitcase, and their child in hand, and all that does is hearken back to our history.
yeah.
Now 80 years ago, 90 years ago, and it's not, I don't sense that this is going to be something where it's going to stop in a week and they're all going to just head back. Even if they did, these cities are destroyed, homes are destroyed. There's going to be a refugee crisis here of monumental proportions, and it's going to be one that is going to take a lot, not weeks, not months, but years to deal with. And I commend the state of Israel for starting to address that, as they brought in refugees, both Jewish and non-Jewish, into the country. Israel has they had a long history of not doing so great with refugees, but in the second half of their history, coming up to today, they do much better. Right? They know what it means to resettle somebody and to support them.
Yeah.
So
I just want to, maybe to kind of bring us full circle to the beginning, I want to just go back to something you said early on, which stuck with me. And that is that you talked about how it's been decades leading up to this moment where we've dropped the ball, that peace cannot happen when we are reacting to tyranny. Peace happens when we prevent tyranny, when we have the foresight, the forethought, the seichel, the wisdom to. I was listening to the news this morning. They were talking about when Putin was chosen to replace who was it? Whoever came before Putin. Now I'm blanking on his name. That the opposition to Putin would have laid the ground for a very, very different future for Russia and that part of the world. And we did not fight hard enough back then. When it was safe to fight, when we weren't worried about chemical weapons, when people weren't being bombed out of their homes, that's when the work really matters. Of course, it matters now also. But long term, big picture, when we talk about, Yaseh Shalom Aleinu, help us make peace, we can't wait until the bombs are dropping to do that work.
Right.
That's as you said, that's work that has to be done over decades.
Right. But now that they are dropping, we also can't shut our eyes and say Schrei Gewalt and not do anything. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we continue watching the news. We continue donating. I hope we continue. I hate to say it, but praying sometimes feels like the only thing that we can do. I don't think that's for nothing. I think that matters. And holding our friends, our cousins in Ukraine in our hearts and our prayers. And also those brave Russians who are standing up and fighting back against this also. So you mentioned you'll probably be speaking about some aspect of this again this Shabbos?
Yeah, I'm working on it. I'm trying to figure out what not forgetting and never again mean in this moment.
Was it last Shabbat or was it the one before? You had mentioned something about President Zelensky and him being Jewish and.
Yeah, so that was last week when I really acknowledged the I'll say the Jewish aspect of this, although he's not. This isn't a Jewish story directly, but that he is someone that we can be proud of.
Yeah.
And we pray for his safety. This past week, like he said, there were 3 assassination attempts on his life.
Really?
How do you live your life that way?
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
No.
All right, my friend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You got it. Everybody have
and thank you everyone for watching. Yeah, and join us on Shab. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, go right. You were saying it.
Just wishing everyone a peaceful Shabbat. And please join us, tsnd.tv, for Shabbat services, both Friday night and Saturday. We hope to see you there. And in a couple weeks on the next Face to Face. Bye, everyone.
Bye.